So, I normally take an hour to do this, and I've only got 35 minutes, especially if I'm going to leave some time for questions. So let me get straight into it. 2017, I was working at Just Eat, now justeattakeaway.com, the world's biggest food technology platform, and it was massive. I couldn't believe it when I joined. I knew it was a big company in so many different countries around the world, but naively maybe I thought, you know, this person wants a pizza, this person's making pizza. It shouldn't be too complicated, right? But it was very complex, and there were so many teams, so many people involved in getting pizzas to people, curries around the city and around the country. And there were so many teams, logistics, different technologies making that happen. And all of these teams were doing research. And what would happen is we would work on a project, we would learn all sorts of things, we would write up our learnings in a report, and we would share that with our team, maybe a few other teams, up with management, and maybe some people even read those reports. But ultimately, what would happen to those reports is they would be put into Google Drive. Exactly. How many people here were here for Arga's talk just before? Right, fantastic talk, and like she was saying, that is where a lot of research lives at the moment, in Google Drive, in Confluence, in those kind of places. And we used to jokingly refer to it as Google Grave, because that's where research went to die. We knew we were probably never going to see it again, right? And quite often I would be starting a project and scrabbling through Google Grave, trying to find anything I could find around the subject we were studying. And I wouldn't be able to find research I had done. So I knew I was missing out on other people's. So this is a big problem. It was one that we're all aware of. We often used to discuss it, especially in the UX teams. This was something we discussed often, but we didn't really have a solution. And I suppose also it wasn't a blocker. It was frustrating. It slowed us down. We were losing so much value. We were wasting so much time and money relearning things that we had already learned. But it wasn't a blocker. And that was true for me as well until I actually ended up founding and leading the accessibility team at Just Eat. And this was a fairly dry subject, but very important subject. But what was great is so many people in the organization was really passionate and really excited that we had an accessibility team. And they wanted to share their knowledge with us. So for our small team, mostly volunteers with extra jobs on top of this, we were completely overwhelmed by an avalanche of reports and knowledge coming at us. And I said, look, we need to stop, we need to deal with this, we need to find a way of dealing with this information so we can actually use it, we can get value from it, and we can give it the due that it deserves. So the first thing to solving a problem is understanding the problem. And it came down to this. Context, and the word context is a word I must use more than just about any other word in my life, at least my professional life. Because context is everything when it comes to a repository, and everything when it comes to knowledge sharing, everything when it comes to knowledge, really. And what we found is traditional reports have lots of context. But the problem is that obscures the actual individual insights, especially for us in the accessibility team, right? Very rarely would someone be studying accessibility. They'll be studying a wider project, and accessibility be a small part of that. And we would like to try and extract that little learning and keep that separate. But the problem is in a 50-page report, maybe one page would be relevant for us, but the other 49 pages gave that one-page context. We couldn't just extract it and have it still understandable, have it still usable. Okay, well, there are insight repositories out there. Maybe we can just use those. Surely they've solved this problem. Once again, exactly as Arga was saying earlier, one of the problems with a lot of insight repositories, they just don't scale, especially at the time. This was back a good few years ago, right? We tried just about every product on the market, and what happened is, yeah, we could store all of that knowledge there, and it was great for that team, maybe for that department, but any larger than that, it didn't have enough context to make it really understandable for people in other departments. It just didn't scale. So we wanted to solve these problems. We had a good idea of understanding of the problem, and this is probably the point. I was introduced just then as the creator of Atomic UX Research. That's not true. This work came about due to the support and help and knowledge and wisdom of so many people Not just in Just Eat. One of the first things we did is we actually went and spoke to other companies. So many teams I speak to on a weekly basis tell me, oh, we're behind the times, we're not as mature as other companies, Dan. Everybody thinks that, right? So if you think that your company is behind the times when it comes to UX research, don't worry, everybody else thinks the same thing about their company for the most part. We thought the same. We thought, well, other people have solved this problem. So we spoke to them. We phoned up different companies, sent emails and LinkedIns to different teams that we respected, we saw on the cutting line. Every single team said to us, every big organization said, yeah, this is a massive problem for us too. How on earth do we get this knowledge to people around the organization? How can we have a single place where such a large organization can keep their information? But thankfully, a lot of those people were willing to work with us. So with a lot of work, with lots of people, we came up with a process. And one individual I want to shout out is someone called David Yates, because he is a fantastic UX designer and researcher, a lovely person, full stop, but also he was the individual who gave me the spark of what ended up being the solution to this problem. So he was drawing on the board, how knowledge and everything connects. What he was drawing reminded me of Atomic Design by Brad Frost. I assume we've probably got a few product designers and design systems people in the room. Hands up if you already know Atomic Design. There's a few hands going up there. Fantastic. For those that don't know, Atomic Design is a fantastic process if you have a design system. Basically, even the most complex UI can be broken down into its most distinct atomic parts. So if you think about, even the most complex UI would be colors, shapes, and text. You could argue, imagery and videos, but really it's colors, shapes, and text, right? So if I take a colored rectangle, put a text on it, I've got a button. I put that button next to a user input, a text box, and I could have a search bar. And in this way, we can go from really simple design tokens up to more and more complex organisms into an entire design system. And I was like, we were using this at Just Eat at the time, and it absolutely blew my mind at just how powerful it could be to allow us to manage a design system over a massive infrastructure, a massive landscape. And I thought, well, if we can do this with complex UI, perhaps we can do this with knowledge. So after a lot of work with a lot of people inside and outside of Just Eat, this is what we came up with. A relatively simple process with 4 distinct parts, or atoms, that connect together to create molecules of research. Actually, a lot of people call these nuggets, and that's due to the great work that Thomas Sharon has done on the subject. And I'll talk a little bit more about him in a moment as well. So it starts with experiments. This is nice having the screen behind me. I normally have to point to things on a screen. So it starts with experiments. Experiments are what we did to learn the information. It's also probably the most disliked terminology. A lot of people prefer activities, or source is a really good one. Experiment sounds a bit formal, doesn't it? But it's where we learned the information, what we did to learn it, where it came from. And what we learned, we call facts. Once again, other people have different terminology for this, maybe findings or learnings. I really love facts as a term, because it reminds us it should be factual. A good fact is a quote, an observation, or a statistic. And credit to Marielle de Geest for coming up with that terminology. When she said there are the 3 things that it could be, I didn't believe her. It could be anything evidence-led, surely. But no, when you sum it up, it's quotes, observation, or statistics. And most importantly, it should be factual. It should not be our opinion. And the reason for that is insights are our opportunity to have an opinion on why the facts are the way they are. Why are customers saying that? Why is the data that way? Why are people doing these things, right? What's the cause and what's the effect? Once again, Marielle de Geest is the person who came up with that clarification, and I love that as a way of thinking about insights. What caused people to be saying that? What caused the data to be that way? What's the effect on us, on our organization, on our customers? It's such a beautiful way of thinking about an insight. So this is what we did, this is what we learned, this is what we think it means, and finally, recommendations of what we're going to do with this information, the actionable next step of what's going to come next, right? And recommendations, the thing about recommendations as well is these are derived from insights. It's so easy sometimes to jump from facts to recommendations. The customer said this, so we're going to do that. And I think one of the real power, as simple as it is, with Atomic UX is forcing people to create an insight. I quite often hear people saying, oh, it's really obvious how this fact connects to this recommendation. We don't need an insight in this case. And I say, no, come on, we need to actually define it. And if it's obvious, it should be simple. And very often in those situations, they are the least simple to define. But it's always powerful, it's always beneficial. So often when someone thinks deeply about, why is that happening? Why did my brain instantly go to that recommendation? They'll define it and they go, well, actually, perhaps that isn't the best way of dealing with that situation. Perhaps there's a more effective, more interesting, cheaper, quicker, more innovative way. But even if they stick with that same recommendation, they have a much better understanding of why they're making that recommendation, right? And more importantly, when someone comes in the future and goes, why did they do that? They can see not just the evidence behind it and how they got that evidence, but what they were thinking. It might be obvious to us, but it doesn't mean it be obvious to other people, especially in the future. We can say, this is why we thought to make that recommendation. Now, the way I'm showing it here makes it look circular. I've just realized I should be going through like this. Here we go. So the way that I'm showing it here makes it look circular, right? Makes it look linear. Experiments through to recommendations, but it is actually a circle. So recommendations lead to experiments. When we recommend something, whether it's a change, whether it's a new product, quite often it might be we just want to do more research to understand if this recommendation is right? So recommendations lead to new experiments, new facts, new insights, new recommendations. And it's not unusual to see recommendations supported by evidence that it's created. So what we're doing here is we're seeing this from like a very top-down view. We could imagine we're a bird flying across above this process right now. So let's zoom down and see what the world looks like from the perspective of each of these atoms. So this is a fact molecule or nugget. And what we can see here is a fact belongs to an experiment. How we learned something is intrinsic to what we learnt. I quite often hear people saying, oh, I've got the same fact in a different experiment. Totally fine thing to say, but technically, it isn't the same fact, right? Because it was learned in a different way, in a different context, through different people, at a different time, etc. So a fact very much belongs to an experiment, but that isn't true for insights and recommendations. Some or all of these insights and recommendations may have existed before this experiment was done, right? We can use evidence to support and to connect to existing insights, or we can create new ones. And one of the great things about this process from a synthesis point of view, and it is a synthesis process, right, ultimately. One of the great things about it is we can think really broadly about what something means and what we're going to do about it. And this is great when we bring colleagues and people together to help synthesize that together. And this is a great process to use for collaboration, especially with non-researchers, because we're dividing up the evidence from the opinion to the action, right? So if someone comes in with biases who really wants something to happen, it's going to be really obvious if their suggestion isn't backed up by evidence. Someone comes up with a really wild idea. We can record it, we can think really broadly, and maybe there's some really amazing things to come out of that, but we don't have to take everything forward. And we can get that really kind of broad background of thinking, different people's ways of thinking, different cultures, different backgrounds and such like. I've even seen people, it's more and more of a trend now, to bring end users and stakeholders. If you're working in an agency, bringing actual clients in. If you're working internally, actually bringing stakeholders from a user perspective into these. So this view here is what I kind of think of as the synthesis view. We're starting with facts, working outwards, branching outwards to insights and recommendations. Whereas this view here, this is what I would see as the researcher's view of things, right? If I was looking at one of your projects, this is probably how I would look at it. I'm most interested in what you've learned and what's the evidence behind that. And I'm curious about what you decided to do next. But what you learn is what's most important to me. And what we can see here is we've actually got lots of facts from across lots of parts of the organization. So in this case, I'm showing 2 experiments, but there's no limit to that. Remember, what we were trying to do in the outset was to allow knowledge to scale in an organization. And what we found is there's no real upper limit to that. I have seen insights that have hundreds of experiments, thousands of facts. Most of your insights will probably only have a few, maybe only over a couple of different experiments. That's totally normal. But especially your more principal insights, they may have evidence from across the entire organization, and depending on how big that organization is, it could be a lot of evidence. And what we find is the more evidence there is, the better. It's actually a power, it's not a downside. If we've got more facts that connect, we have a greater confidence that it's true or that it's not true. Or if there's a real mixture of evidence, it kind of develops nuance. So you might notice here I've got green lines connecting some of the facts and red dotted lines connecting some, and out to the recommendations as well. What that's showing is we can actually use facts to support an insight or facts to disprove an insight. We use the terms prove and disprove it cleanly. But another way of thinking of it is these green facts here give us confidence on this insight, the red ones detract it. And the same for insights to recommendations, right? So let's change the view again. This is the view that stakeholders love. This is what we might deliver to a decision maker. This is the recommendation. Here are the insights that support this. Here is an insight that doesn't support this. Maybe this is a reason we either don't do this, or at least something we need to keep in mind when we're making that decision. And then we got the evidence to give us confidence on those insights. So let me show you an example that looks relatively realistic. This is a made-up example, but it's my favorite example. I know Arga's already seen this, and a few people may have seen this. This is my favorite way of showing this, because this has got a little bit of everything going on. So what we've got here is a recommendation. Now, if we imagine we're a product owner or a decision maker in an organization, we need to decide whether we're going to offer free shipping on all orders or not. Okay, well, it's a good idea, but why should we do this? We've got a few insights here that prove. The first one says the users are leaving the checkout flow to find free shipping coupons. Sometimes they're not coming back, so we could stop that from happening. We can see that shipping cost is a deciding factor to purchase decision. Okay, so if we remove that purchase decision, we'll probably see conversion go up. That's great. And then we've got free shipping is a delighting factor and can be used in product marketing. Okay, that's great as well. So I want to delight our customers. And if we do go ahead with that, I probably want to share this with our marketing department so they can use that as well. So these are 3 good reasons why we might choose to offer free shipping. But we've actually got a few recommendations there that actually disprove. It looks like there's for some reason, that's kind of blown out there. I think I need to, it's probably burning your eyes as well. I'm going to have a dark mode version of this, right? This is something I'm going to take forward. Anyway, so we've got 2 disproves here. So these are reasons either we might choose not to do this, or at least things that considerations that we have to keep in mind when we're making this decision. So the first one there, shipping cost. We can't just add that to our purchase price because it will make us look uncompetitive. So if we do this, we're going to have to pay for the shipping ourselves. That could be really expensive. We could lose money on this, right? And the last one says, Italian shoppers are averse to free shipping. Have we got anyone who's Italian here? I'm not Italian myself, I'm British, but I've got some Italian family, and that does not sound right to me. Well, on that subject, why should I trust any of this? Well, each of these insights are connected to experiments. This one's connected to 4. And we can see we've got a range there. We've got a few A/B tests. We've got some moderated user tests there. We've got here, we can see some customer comments. So these are the individual facts. So this first one there says, when I'm spending this much, I expect free shipping. It's an expectation for them. Okay, well, that's quite compelling. This one here disproves. They say they just find the lowest possible price and they don't even think about the shipping. They just hope it's not too expensive. So if we do, actually you can even see that, I'm stood in front of it, there we go. So if we do this, we're not going to change that person's purchase decision, right? But we did try this in the UK. Oh, look, and we did an A/B test. Really, really successful, actually. We conversion lifted by 6%. It cost us $75,000. That's pretty painful, but it more than made up for that. I'm going to stand over here. It more than made up for that with the increase in sales. So yeah, we made 100,000 there. Really happy with that. Tried it in France once again. Cost us 150, but made us 250. So about 100 grand again. So I might be asking the question now: are we spending too much money for shipping in France, perhaps? And then finally, yeah, you can see now why someone might think Italians are adverse to free shipping. Conversion dropped massively, sales value dropped. Now, the researcher in me thinks probably there's a problem with that test. Probably it's badly translated, badly implemented. It just doesn't sit right with me. But if I can retest that A/B test and it keeps on coming back the same, if I get it checked by a native speaker and it's absolutely fine, the next thing I want to do is speak to some Italian customers, right? I need to speak to some people, get some qualitative on this, and I can connect that up and say, yeah, actually, there is something I didn't understand as a British person about Italian culture and free shipping. Or maybe there was something else we didn't understand. Well, importantly, I can bring these different sources together, the qualitative, the quantitative, wherever the information is coming from. And even more importantly, in the future, when someone comes in and goes, we're offering free shipping all across Europe, why are we not doing this in Italy? They can see exactly why we made that decision. What's the evidence behind it? Now, they might disagree with our decision, they might disagree with our thinking, but at least they can understand it. And if they have new evidence they can bring to the table, that's great as well. So after a lot of work on this process, as I say, with a lot of people, I wrote an article on Medium in 2018, I think it was, and I was really surprised when it got shared loads of times. No one knew who I was, and it was the first time I ever wrote an article. But then the European Commission picked it up as the basis of their research process. Uber built Kaleidoscope, their internal repository, and they used Atomic as a basis of it. And it's been used by massive companies as well as small companies all around the world. And this is one of the things I found interesting. The biggest value is for large companies, right? The bigger your organization, the more research you have, the bigger the value. Kind of multiplies. But actually, there's a lot of people I know who do not even need a repository that still enjoy Atomic purely as a synthesis process. We didn't set out to create a synthesis process, and we certainly didn't set out to design a good one. It was purely natural and accidental that was the case. But it is a really lovely way of thinking about knowledge, and a lot of people enjoy it from that perspective. Right, I'm going to have a quick sip. I shouldn't stand here too long next to the word tool. So we know the basic process. How can we actually implement this? What tools do we need to give it a go? And actually, if we just wanted to give it a taste from a synthesis point of view, all we need is a whiteboard and sticky notes, right? What would we do without whiteboards and sticky notes as UX people, right? Or if we wanted to use Miro or FigJam, any of those kind of products. It's so cheap, so easy. Obviously, it doesn't make a repository. Unless you've got a lot of whiteboards in your office, it's not really kind of scalable. But it's a good way just to test it from a synthesis point of view. Because if it doesn't work for you from a synthesis point of view, it's probably not worth going any further. But most researchers, most people that try this, I believe, come away saying, yeah, actually, I get this. I got a lot out of that, and actually, I got much richer results. It was quite a nice way of just thinking about knowledge. And it's so simple. It's great for bringing non-researchers in, as I said earlier. So the way we do that, facts along the top, insights along the bottom, insights along the middle, recommendations along the bottom. And we do a bit of affinity map to get the facts together. One thing I would say is try not to do this on too big a study. If you've got lots and lots of facts up there, it can be hard to draw long lines. It gets very complex. We did a project with Honda last year where we had over 1,200 facts in one experiment. And you can imagine what that would look like on a whiteboard. It would be just like someone threw spaghetti at the wall. So keep it small if you're going to give it a go on this one. A lot of people's next step is something like Airtable. As Arga said earlier, majority of researchers are using non-dedicated tools. And I've seen just about every tool being used for this. Airtable is probably one of the most common. Notion's very popular. I've seen Confluence. I even met someone a little while ago who's using Jira as their repository, which blows my mind because I can barely create a ticket in Jira, let alone a repository. So fair play to them. If you did want to use Airtable, there's actually a few Airtable bases already there, set up to get you started. So this is one by Thomas Sharon, who I mentioned earlier, because he's been very influential. I also mentioned, when I wrote that article on Medium, no one knew who I was. And I think the reason it did get shared, I think the reason I'm stood here before you now is because of Thomas Sharon. He is very well known, very well respected, and he started talking about this subject and brought a lot to the table with this. So he was head of research at WeWork, and he created this Airtable base. and very kindly made this available to everyone. Now, what I would say is I think this is set up quite specifically for Airtable. So keep that in mind. I've seen people become unstuck because of that. So actually, this is the one that I would recommend if you're going to get started with Airtable. It's by Martin and Guillaume at Accents. Accents is a large agency in Paris. And they work with all sorts of different companies and different types of companies. So they've made this a lot more approachable by anybody. Now, ARG has really set me up lovely for this because dedicated research tools are so important. And we did find that no matter what tool we were using, there were certain things we found really frustrating. One of the biggest problems we found was actually creating those visuals. I was showing you on that kind of example how different insights and, can connect to recommendations and facts to insights, both from a synthesis point of view, but also from a delivery point of view. It was a real challenge to try and create this. I was creating a lot of those visuals from scratch. So I asked a colleague and friend, actually a CTO of a company I was consulting with, if he could do me an Airtable plugin. And he came back and said, oh, Dan, I need to create an actual custom database for this. It's a bit complex for Airtable. I said, okay, no problem. Anyway, we ended up, over COVID, creating an entire fully scaled repository that's now used by some of the world's biggest brands. Totally was not something I was expecting to do. I said several years ago, I'm never going to start another company because I hate being in business. But here we are. This is where life took me. But I love it. I'm really proud of Gleanly. It's built around Atomic as a process, and it's a really beautiful tool that's built directly for this. But that's saying that, nothing I'm telling you today requires a dedicated piece of tooling to deliver, right? A lot of people, if they get into the process, do like having a dedicated tool, but if that's not possible, if you've already got something you're committed to, or you don't have the budget, what you've got will probably work. But let's not forget Argus talk of the benefit of dedicated tooling. So we've got our tool, and we know the process. So next, where does Atomic sit in my workflow? There's a few things I think are really useful to think about if you're going on this journey. And the first is, I said earlier that a good fact is a quote, an observation, or statistic. What it isn't is raw data. Okay, so if I ran a survey, I'd like to be able to say 64% of respondents say they prefer green clothing. What I don't want to say is respondent 763 said yes to question B. That's useless to anybody, right? It needs to be human. We need to get to the point that our decision makers, when we share this with them, they can very quickly go, what's the evidence? Look at it in a glance and understand it quickly, but most importantly, accurately. It's no good, they can read it in a millisecond if it's not accurate, right? So we need to be able to give them good quality summaries of the data, of what people are saying, whether that's qualitative or quantitative. So that means there is a certain amount of of analysis needed before it goes into the Atomic framework. This is kind of the journey that most of them take. I think a more interesting way of looking at this is from a tooling point of view. So ignore these specific logos, but the great news is we can carry on using the methods that you already love. We can keep on using the tools that you already love. Atomic is completely agnostic on the source of the information. How are we doing for time? 15, that's great. So we can use the tools, the sources, the individuals, however you're currently getting your information, and bring it into your Atomic flow, into your repository, synthesize it into recommendations. Someone needs to make a decision on those recommendations. Once that decision is made, it goes just into the normal project management flow. So it's very low impact in an organization. The only thing it's really interrupting is the synthesis part. And if you already have a repository, maybe it slightly changes the way that you interact with that repository. But yeah, very low disruption there. Come on, there we are. Oh, let me quickly take you back to this screen. I showed you this briefly a second ago. This is actually a real case from a real customer that we're working with. They are a French fashion brand, and they started using the Atomic process, and they've been doing a survey using Qualtrics. And Qualtrics, like a lot of tools, Maze is very good at this as well, it analyzes all the data and it outputs insights. And that confused them a little bit because they brought the insight. One of the insights was 64% of respondents claim they prefer green clothing. So they brought that into their repository as an insight. They went, okay, but what do we put as the fact? Because Dan said, don't bring in raw data. And no, in this case, that isn't an insight, it's a fact. It's a fact that people in that survey said they prefer green clothing. Okay, but is that even true? It may just be in that survey. Maybe we've got other surveys, other data that disproves that, you know. And I said to them, you know, have you got any data? Now, they were using Tableau, I think it was. So they were very quickly able to go into their sales data and said, yeah, depending on where we cut the spectrum of green, we're selling 200% more green clothes than any other. Great, so we've got 2 bits of quantitative data there that really give us confidence that something is going on. And because these are facts, we've now got insights where we can think about why this is happening. And this is what I wanted to say, really. Insights should not just be a summary of the data. We can hypothesize on the cause and the effects. Now, we've got 2 bits of quantitative data there, right? We don't have the qualitative. We can't answer that yet. But by hypothesizing on what the cause may be, maybe this is because there's something about our branding, about our marketing. Maybe it's just a trend in fashion at the moment. Everyone's buying green clothes. What's the effect? Is this a good thing? Can we become the green clothing company? Or maybe we're actually losing loads of sales because we're putting off people who love blue and red clothes. So we can think about what this might mean to us. And by thinking about that, that can help us work out where to go next to answer these questions, right? That would define the recommendations, the next actionable steps. And one of the things actually someone said in that meeting is, well, maybe we should run an A/B test on the homepage. We've got a beautiful big hero image. Maybe we should swap that for some lovely green clothing. And they're like, okay, yeah. Now, I spoke to them about 2 months later, and they said, look, we've gone on this amazing learning journey. We're learning all sorts of things about our customers and their buying habits, which have been sparked from this question, why so much green clothing? But they said, yeah, that A/B test we did, we saw a 4.6% increase in conversion. That's really significant, right? Really significant. They didn't know why this was happening, but they got the value because they were just being creative around it. And I truly think if that had just sat on the shelf as an insight, imagine if you were a product designer for a fashion brand and they said, oh yeah, people like green clothing. I think I would have thought, well, there's a filter for that, that's fine. But by moving that as a fact, by being creative and around the insights, it allowed them to really kind of find the value and go on this beautiful learning discovery and this beautiful journey of discovery. So, talking about hypothesis, a lot of people think that atomic is grounded theory, where you start with the evidence and you work out to the conclusion. But actually, it doesn't need to be. We can start anywhere in this. Remember, it's meant to be a circle. I've shown it in a line here, but we can start anywhere in that circle, and we can work backwards. So, if someone comes to you and says, I think we should build a new feature, we can put it in there as a hypothesis. If someone says, I think our customers prefer green clothing, we can put that in as an insight. I like to call hypothetical insights assertions, but you know, whatever terminology you prefer. So, yeah, okay. We've got this idea. Do we have any evidence that backs us up already? Do we already know the answer to that? And if not, how can we fill the gaps on that? How can we answer these questions? So we can work backwards as well as forwards. Now, I mentioned earlier, let me just have a sip. I mentioned earlier that we can bring any kind of research into our repository. So one of the questions I'm often asked is, well, what about if it's not UX research? It's called Atomic UX Research, after all, so obviously it's for UX. And I was completely naive at the beginning of this journey in thinking this was a UX problem. It's not. It's a knowledge problem, and knowledge affects every part of an organization. And you can absolutely bring all sorts of knowledge into your repository that is not user research based. The Gleanly one, for instance, our individual one, we include developer knowledge. So why have we got this new API? What's the benefit of it? What was the problem with the old one? What opportunities does this open up for us? And what walls does it block us in the future? One of the weirdest organizations I've worked with on this subject is a criminal investigations organization. So if you think of something like the CIA, it's not the CIA, it's for a different country, but they're solving serious crimes like murders, and it's really difficult in a murder investigation to bring those different types of evidence together. You've got blood splatter, DNA, you've got the qualitative interview and CCTV and witness and all sorts of things. It's difficult to bring that together in a useful way, and Atomic's helping them do that. They're able to not just bring all of these different sources together, but they're also able to follow their hunch, what we would call a hypothesis. they would call a hunch, right? We can follow those threads, try and work out who done it. So if we can bring any type of knowledge in, can we bring any people in? Can we allow people who are not researchers to contribute to our repository? I strongly think everybody should be included, right? And I think Atomic can really help with some of the challenges around that. So the biggest challenge, some of you are thinking now, well, if I allow non-researchers to contribute to my repository, what about the quality? And that brings me to probably one of my more controversial opinions, and it is just my opinion. This is all my opinion, so ignore as much as you want. But I think this is one of the very few situations in life where quantity is more important than quality. And you'll say, okay, well, what if someone puts poor quality research in my repository? People are going to make decisions on that. I've got bad news for you. If there's poor quality research happening in your organization, people are making decisions on that. People do not do research for fun. Well, okay, normal people don't do research for fun. People like you and me might do, okay? But if people are doing research, they're making decisions on it. And if it's poor quality, they're making poor quality decisions. The problem is, if it's not in your repository, you're not going to be aware of that. So what we need to do is we need to allow everything in there. We can lower the barriers, keep the entry barriers really low, reduce the friction, bring it in. And if someone is doing research that isn't up to scratch, we can go and help them. We don't have to hit them with a stick. We can say, look, I'm sorry, I don't think this is the right method. Or I don't think your evidence really supports your conclusions. Let me help you with that. And we can deal with that, we can support that. But if we're not aware of it, we can't, right? And I think Atomic really helps with that as well. It's really obvious if the evidence does not support the recommendation. Now, this is a bit of a silly situation, but if I'm the person who needs to make the decision whether we're going to make the logo bigger or not, I'm not under any illusions whether the evidence supports it. I might still do it because I want to make my boss happy, but I know the evidence isn't there. What I probably would do is test that and see if maybe conversion goes down. I can go back to my boss and go, that did not work. We're losing money because of your idea. Tagging's really difficult, right? I've been dedicated to this subject for the last 6 years, maybe 7 years now, and I'm still learning things about taxonomy. Taxonomy is so important, but Atomic really reduces the pressure on it. When we connect facts to insights and insights to recommendations, we're coding via stealth and in a very human way as well. I have seen whole, massive, valuable repositories with barely a tag in them. They'd be better if they did, much better. Taxonomy is so important, but Atomic really reduces the pressure on it. Anyway, I'm not going to read out all of these benefits. Take a photo if you want, but I've only got 7 minutes left, and I want to give some time for questions. The one I am going to call out is this last one. The biggest benefit of a repository, not just an Atomic repository, though I think that particularly helps with it, is collaboration. You know, before this talk, Argo gave some really great benefits of a repository. Lots of ones are about reduction, right? Reducing the time it takes to get to your evidence, reducing the time it takes to do the research, right? And Atomic should definitely reduce the amount of time it takes to do research. Reducing the amount of loss, all those kind of things. But the biggest benefit is the increase in collaboration. If I find out that someone in my team has already worked on a problem I'm struggling with, we'll talk, right? If we realize that we're working on similar projects, we'll talk to each other. And so often, I speak to companies that have been using a good quality repository, Atomic or otherwise, and the biggest benefit for them is collaboration, right? So the very final thing I'm going to leave you with, which is, I think, the most important thing that I could possibly say, and the most important learning I've made over the last 6 to 8 years, and that is research repositories aren't for us. Research repositories are not for researchers. They're for decision makers. And allow that to make your decision, to guide your strategy at every turn. If I'm ever stuck between two options, I always think about what allows our decision makers to make a better quality decision quicker. And if I normally one of those options shines out as being the answer. And if you take nothing away other than this today from my talk, that is probably one of the most valuable things that you can keep in mind. So I thank you very much for your time. There is an Atomic UX research cheat sheet that you can download and use. Once again, thank you to Mary de Gies for helping me with that. And I would love to take any questions that you have.
First of all, big applause to Daniel. Great presentation. Thank you very much. So now we have 5 minutes for questions. Any? Don't be shy. Oh, there is one.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for a highly engaging presentation.
Thank
you.
you.
Lovely. And my question is, I've been working with atomic research for a while now. I've been even teaching about it. And there is one thing that I can't stop thinking about. How do you not lose the context of a research or an experiment in the process of reasoning? I think this is the most difficult thing for me to understand.
So, really great question. So let me just make sure I've understood it correctly. So losing the context between the activity you did and the facts to the insights or to the recommendations, or both? To the insights. So definitely one of the challenges, especially if you've got lots of evidence from a large part of the organization, is some of that is going to be more relevant than others, right? Especially if it's a more principal insight, I might have sources from across the whole organization. And depending on who I am as the viewer, the context is going to be very different. One of the things we tried to do at Gleanly was actually create a kind of algorithm of truth, quite grandly, but basically evidence scoring. And we weighted based on the type of evidence it was, how old it was, and one of the things was context. So if we know your kind of business area, we can weight evidence from your business area higher. And that kind of worked. There was other reasons. I'll speak in a second about why we dropped the scoring in the end and went for a much simpler solution. But the thing is actually, someone on the other side of the world in a completely different department may have more of a similar problem than someone else in the same department. Context is so difficult. So, I mean, my answer to you is, it's really difficult. I don't have an answer. It's a challenge. The only thing you can do is make sure the taxonomy, the writing of your individual atomic elements is really well written. So anyone coming in can understand, wait a minute, this is research that's from Japan. It's going to be very different to Italy, for example. They're still humans at the end of the day, so it's still relevant, but we probably want to retest it. Things like that, or this is from a very different product that's aimed at a very different part of the market, for example. So yeah, I'd say taxonomy is the biggest solution. Thank you so much.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. What if most of my facts are quantitative, and how to keep it up to date? Is any integration with some data analytics tool possible?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so depending on the tool you're using, you should be able to automate evidence in, whether it's quantitative or qualitative. A lot of our customers, for instance, will have a voice of customer experiment where constantly any, say, review or feedback or, say, App Store reviews will come in and feed into an experiment. The thing that is most important there, and this isn't just an atomic thing, this is just a thing to remember, so many companies I see automate research, right? What they don't do is put a trigger in to actually look at that research, to actually do something with it. All this data is going into a big old, bucket of data, and no one's looking at it. There's no value from there, right? So the most important thing you can do if you automate research, in my opinion, is put triggers in there. Give it to someone as their responsibility, or have a regular insights review where you go in and you go, right, what are people saying? What do we know about this? And you'll be surprised probably what's in there. Not just dip in there when you've got a particular question you need to answer, but see what's coming out of it as well. Hope that answered your question. Thank you.